Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Jared Hornsby, and I'm here to answer any technical or general questions that you may have in today's webinar. Today's webinar's title is The Evolution of Employee Listening, 2023 Trends and Best Practices. Here's today's timing breakdown. These numbers are just rough, so please don't hold me to these. At any point during today's webinar, if you have a question, please don't hesitate to submit using the Ask a Question tab at the bottom of your screen. You can also chat with your fellow audience members using the audience chat also at the bottom of your screen. Please let us know where you're coming in from. Here's a little bit about us over at Reworked. We were founded in 2020. We cover the primary topics that you see here on this slide. You can learn a little bit more about us and sign up for upcoming conferences and webinars at reworked.co. That's reworked.co. Here's a little bit about today's sponsor, WorkTango. WorkTango offers the only holistic employee experience platform built for the modern workplace that enables meaningful recognition and rewards, offers actionable insights through employee surveys, supports alignment through goal setting and feedback. We're here today with the co-founder of WorkTango, Mr. Rob Catalano. Take it away, Rob.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. I am excited to be here. Cool to see people in from all over the US, Canada. Haven't seen anyone global yet. Hopefully we got people coming in from there. I'm actually in from Toronto. It's a beautiful sunny day. It's like almost 30 degrees Celsius. I think that's probably like 90 Fahrenheit. I live in the US and I still can't do that conversion. But I am so excited to be here today to talk about this topic. I spent the last 2 decades working in organizations, trying to build wonderful employee experiences, building technology companies to support those types of initiatives. And again, I'm just very excited to talk about something I'm very, very passionate about. That being said, I'm not only passionate about building great employee experiences in this topic, I'm also really passionate about music. And I always like infusing that into my conversations. And that's actually where we're going to start today. Some other folks from Toronto as well. How's it going? It's hopefully enjoying the nice weather. But I do want to start with this slide. And you probably recognize these people, right? These 4 people have something unique in common beyond being famous musicians. And every time I show this slide, you're probably thinking the same thing I'm thinking, that Steven Tyler looks like John Travolta in Grease, right? I can't get it out of my head. It just looks like it. But again, you know these individuals, and these aren't just famous singers. They actually have the record in the recording studio for the widest vocal range at around 6 octaves. And that's really impressive if you know anything about music. Now, you know who these people are. They're famous. But I bet you don't know who this person is. This is actually Tim Storms. He actually holds the Guinness record for the widest vocal range at 10 octaves. But he crushes them all. And I know what you're thinking. Rob, what the heck does this have to do with employee listening and employee voice? So a few things that pop in my mind and why I tell this story. The first is that there's a range of voices in your organizations that you just don't hear from, right? We typically have the loudest person in the room being heard, right? We forget that there's employees under the radar that have a wider range of opinions than the popular opinion in the room. Or there's people out there like Tim that have great ideas and things to say that we're not even aware of. Now, the other story I tell about this is that I find from an HR perspective, we're so stuck in what we know that we don't change our approaches to how we listen to employees and how we create a different employee voice strategy. And the reality is that's okay with music, right? But not in the way that we approach things. So sidebar, I don't know about you, but I'm guilty from a music perspective. I listen to the same albums all the time. I am not embarrassed that, I still listen to the Metallica and CNC Music Factory, albums that I had back in the 80s. These are cassette tapes for anyone new. But I'm curious in the chat, what is I'm not even gonna say guilty pleasure. What are you proud of that you listened to from the past that, when it pops on your radio, you put that full blast? I wonder if there's anyone wants to share some inspiration and great music that they love out there in the chat. So we got some Fleetwood. Love that. Thanks, Jay. What else we got in terms of great music experiences? All right. Rush. There we go. So we got some local stuff. Anyways, so I digress. So Billy Idol, the Smiths. All right. Everyone's there. Everyone's with me. All right. Classical music, Foo Fighters. Love it. So the reason why I bring this up in terms of not changing your music preferences is that in the spirit of listening to music, the same music all the time, I think companies are really guilty of this in terms of how we approach listening to our employees. Companies still use the engagement survey, the annual engagement survey, as the predominant way to understand employee sentiment to effectively improve the employee experience. But the reality is, when I talk to people, they say it's too infrequent, it's too isolated, and it's only one part of the whole employee experience. Oh, there's some good ones coming up now. I like it. But what's crazy to me is that this method of listening to the voice of employees, this annual engagement survey, was created over 100 years ago. Literally in the World War, this was invented, and companies are still today using it as the way to listen to their employee voice. We need to start changing our approaches to relate to the modern workplace and the modern employee that we have out there. And that's why I really want to talk about a few things today in today's discussion. Right? First, why employee voice is important, right? And why it really matters. We'll spend a bit of time there. Second is the evolution of employee voice and how it's been changing. I have the pleasure of doing this for 2 decades and have a wisdom of crowds of seeing what companies have done, what they've tried, what works and what doesn't work. And I want to translate a lot of that into 5 trends in how companies are shifting their employee voice strategy. What I'll end it with is 4 examples of mindsets to leave you with, right? I always, after doing this for so long, when people reflect back on their journey, they talk about specific mindsets I want to bring to the table today. But the reality is I'm just the opening act, right? I'm just the opening act. What I'm very excited to do is to hear the Rexall story. When I'm finished a few trends and some mindsets, I want to, I'll formally introduce our guests here from Rexall to share their story. Well, how have they implemented an employee listening strategy? What are the results they've started to see in their journey? And really excited to bring them here, and also very thankful that they're here with us. So I'll walk through this right now. And the first point on this agenda is why employee voice is important and why it matters. And every time I conduct one of these talks, I always ask one question that I feel I should ask myself or you should ask of me. And that question is, who cares? By the way, this is the coolest technology on the planet. You search who cares in Google and this comes up. Like ChatGPT, AI, it's got nothing on the ability for this picture to come up when I ask Google who cares. But I wanted to just set the table with some insights, some data. I could talk about this all day, but I'm high level want to share some real data out there of why we should care about this topic in general. Maybe you're new to the world of employee listening. Maybe it's something you do every day, but I did want to level set in terms of why we should care and why this matters. First, using a bit of data, companies that have high voice organizations versus low voice have almost double engagement, double trust in leadership, and all the things you see on the screen there, right? Again, a lot of data to support it. But one last reason why, and this is a recent study done from Josh Person, I'm sure you all know him if you're in the space, is that organizations that actively listen to their employees and act accordingly are 12 times more likely to engage and retain their employees. We all know the impact of engaged employees. We all know the impact of not having to rehire, lose that intellectual capacity, the costs associated with it, right? So again, this stuff really matters. I only have 30 minutes today, so I'm gonna leave you with those 2 data points. If you want more, let me know. I'll shoot them over to you. But I really want to dive into the real part of today's conversation, which 5 modern employee voice trends of things I'm seeing in terms of how companies are approaching their employee voice strategies different than the past, right? Different than the annual engagement survey once a year. So we'll dive into that right now. I'm seeing a lot of really good things. Sorry, I saw AC/DC, Floyd, love Floyd, Pavarotti. Look at there's all kinds of cool things here. Yes, Trip, we'll share the slides for sure. Smashing Pumpkins, I just recently saw them. Old school hip hop. Love that, Tracy. Anyways, I'll digress. I can talk about music all day, but today's about employee voice. So let's start off with the 5 trends. And first one I want to talk about is you need to be more agile. Companies need to be agile. Please tell me in the chat who this is or what this image is from. I'm not sure if people know where this is from. What do we got in the chat here? Anyone know what this video is? I'm using the awkward silence to capture people's attention. Marty McFly, thanks, Alec. Yes, Back to the Future. So think about it, right? You have to be more agile. The past, we could conduct an annual employee survey, but we have to be more agile in the way that we listen to the voice of our employees. Because HR agility means moving quickly, being responsive, being nimble, and effectively managing change in your organization. And guess what? Our companies are seeing a lot of change right now, right? Change in remote work versus in office work, change in building more inclusive, diverse workplaces. There's change management initiatives and transformations happening across the board. We need to be more agile. And I see companies jumping on this trend more than ever when it comes to listening to our employees. Now, why this is important? Well, it's important because success isn't linear, right? We all know that when we define our success every quarter, every year, it's not just easy to get to those goals. We have to navigate through what's happening around us. And we're so used to thinking the world in annual practices in HR. I don't know if it's because we grew up from the CFO world, but the reality is our employees don't work in years. They work in days and hours and months, and more frequent than that. We have to be more frequent and agile in how we're listening to the voice of the employees. That's why very successful companies have been evolutionizing this approach. And this has been going on for a while, right? I love this chart. This is a little old. It's 2018. But what it showed is even from 2015 to 2018, in this study from Gartner, companies went from almost 90% to under 70% using an annual employee survey. And I've seen this in the space. And even though the data there, I'm waiting for their new report to put out on this, but it's a big shift in the way companies are approaching this. So it's already happening, and it's happening because that's a need of our modern organizations and our modern employees. Now, what does this evolution really look like? So a lot of companies started here, right? They started with the annual survey like we talked about. But many companies then jumped onto the Pulse. And, Pulse, it's an improvement. It's more frequent. But typically, it's been the same survey or the same subset of questions that companies have just asked over and over. And typically, that comes with complacency. People tune out. Now, what the modern trend is people are really focusing on what I call active listening. And that's where you start diving into more of just pulsing and asking the same question, but actively listening, not just measuring things like engagement or measuring DE&I, but actually thinking about diagnostic feedback. So active listening, I always say, it's more than measurement, right? One point about agility is you have to be more frequent in understanding the voice of employees so that you can actually do something with that information and navigate through your world. If you're only measuring engagement or DE&I or their onboarding experience from a satisfaction perspective, it won't give you the information to be agile in your organization. You need frequency combined with the diagnostic feedback. Every time I talk about agility, people say, well, we just have to ask questions more often or send surveys out more often. But the reality is if you combine the frequency with diagnostic feedback, that's when you can get agile and understand what's working and not working in your organization. To add a little more color to that, every time I talk about active listening, it's not just about measuring things like engagement, you're rotating trends to see what's working or not working, or your factors or contributors to things like employee engagement. The magic is in the diagnostic questions. How do you dig deeper into feedback? You don't need 17 questions to know whether people feel recognized at work. You need one. The next time in that next active listening model or the next pulse, dig into that if the sentiment is low from a recognition perspective, as an example. But more importantly, how do you understand sentiment of change happening in your company, right? How do you get feedback about a new initiative you just rolled out? Did it hit the mark? Did it not? What do we do differently? More importantly, how do you get feedback about change you're going to make so that you get it right and navigate through some questions and concerns from employees before you do it? And again, finally, employee voice. I always like asking open-ended feedback in this model so that we're not just getting sentiment of what people feel, but actually recommendations and feedback we can use in that approach as well. And the reason why I show this is that many companies that have shifted to be more agile are using this active listening approach because they're getting that feedback, they're able to do something within real time and dig deeper into things that really matter in their company. Every time I bring this up, though, people say, what about survey fatigue? And I will tell you, there's no such thing as survey fatigue. There's lack of action fatigue. I work with organizations that do this quarterly, monthly, bi-weekly, weekly, and they still figure it out because they're actually doing something with that information, which is really critical. And, don't take my word for it. I brought up Josh already, and he's looking really dapper here. But in his words, you cannot maintain a positive employee experience without listening to your people on a continuous basis. So again, that kind of rounds up the agile trend. The second trend I really wanted to talk about is, You need to leverage and accept new technology. Technology is making it easier for companies to find more value in the way that they're trying to understand employee sentiment or improve their employee voice strategy. Here's a good example. So when you think about the concept of employee listening, whether it's surveys or something else, there's a process of listening, there's understanding, like getting the insights, what the trends are, where there might be smoke before fire, kind of understanding what the data is saying, and then there's an action component. I talked to 20 companies that looked at their previous way of conducting this process without technology, and the average time of actually getting to action was 4.3 months, 17 to 18 weeks. Then spoke to similar companies that have used and leveraged the WorkTango technology, and it was less than 3 weeks. So 6 times more efficient when it comes to getting from a listening perspective to actually conducting action about it. And I think technology is a good enabler for agility, which is the first trend. And again, the ROI and speed, the ROI from the speed and the activity cost of just doing it manually, I think speaks for itself. But I want to bring up technology because there's other examples of what tech offers more than just speed. A couple examples I want to share. By the way, who remembers this? Like, this is my youth and my childhood reading, the cassette inserts to find out what the lyrics were going to say. But every time I think about an employee survey or getting feedback from employees and reading the hundreds or thousands of comments, this is what I remember. But technology can make this instant, right? How do you use machine learning to get themes and sentiment about what's happening in your organization, right? Just one example of how technology plays a role. Another example of how technology plays a role. How many of you have read a comment and it's vague and it's negative, but you can't do anything about it because it's confidential, right? Technology allows organizations to have, confidential conversations that dig into comments or curate and crowdsource ideas that are happening in your organization. So again, just examples of how technology is playing a role. But this would not be an HR session in 2023 if I didn't talk about AI. So by the way, I don't know if anyone saw this, but there was someone who created a Drake song using AI. By the way, I'm in Toronto. I'm Canadian. I have to bring up Drake in a session. It's just part of our constitution. But it's amazing, and I can't believe that it's AI. But the reason why I bring up AI is if you think about that listen and understand and act journey, AI is doing amazing things. From a listening perspective, it's identifying bias and questions right away if people are creating their own surveys, or auto-translating language into work language that really matters to them. Right? From an understanding perspective, it's summarizing insights very simply, just like I talked about with machine learning and the employee comments. It's highlighting anomalies and trends in data right away, correlating it to other data sets that you have. From an action perspective, AI is recommending actions directly to leaders or delivering curated learning experiences to the leaders based on feedback for their teams. So I bring up the technology as an enabler because it's a huge trend. Companies are realizing they need the capacity and speed to start improving their employee listening strategy. I read this recently. It's an automated world and HR is just living in it. We should be driving it, right? And the reality is, what are we doing? What is our HR tech strategy when it comes to 1, 3, 5 years from now, and getting ahead of that to enable a lot of things I just talked about, not just for employee listening, but in the future. So that's the second trend. Third trend, you need to leverage your secret weapons, and those are your managers. I am sorry, but I feel bad for managers, right? They are the face of antiquated HR practices that we put in front of them. Hey, here's data that's 4 months stale. Hey, do this performance appraisal process once a year and rate your people, 1 to 3. We literally put them in positions where it's really hard for them to succeed and forget that they're employees too. But they are our biggest leverage point when it comes to leveraging employee feedback and employee listening. Ask yourself a very, very, very serious question right now. And that question is, are managers tools? Are your managers tools? Are they good tools that you can use for helping drive success of your teams and employees, or are they just tools? And the reason why I ask this question is this is the unfortunate stigma our managers have. I went on the good old Google and I searched my manager. And this is what I got. Is toxic, hates me, doesn't like me. In French, again, I'm in Canada. Maybe that's why. Ignores me, harassing me, is incompetent. Apparently there's a Korean show I need to watch. Was rude to me. And I read all this, and the one thing that offended me more than all of this was at the bottom, it said report inappropriate behaviors. all of this is inappropriate. I can't believe this is the way, this is what people think of our managers in our organizations. But I bring this up because the reality is we think about employee listening, but in general, how do we enable our leaders with tools and not create tools? When I talk about tools, enabling them with technology, enabling them with real-time data, and enabling them with a better process and expectations on what an employee listening strategy looks like. Guess what? If you're going to give leaders data once a year on what their employees think, there's no accountability to do anything about it or to act on it because it's 365 days down the road. The more frequent and agile we get, we leverage technology. Now we can enable our leaders to build more accountability in building a great employee experience. And we could argue all day on this, but arguably, leaders have the biggest influence on the experience of your employees that you want to create. So how do you leverage them the best way possible? One of the most rapidly growing trends, what great companies are doing, and my advice to you is do not be a filter. HR, filters are cute for music celebrities, but not in the workplace. I see so many companies conducting things like surveys and keeping the data with them, not sharing the verbatim comments with leaders, not sharing the data with leaders. They're your leaders, right? They should have this information to build that better experience. Big trend I'm seeing, probably most of the, more than agility and even technology, is giving employees feedback directly to every single leader in your organization. Sharing that data builds trust, but again, that accountability to do something with it. Yes, transparency, exactly. What's also great is once you have that data, that's where you can support nudging leaders, right? How do you recommend actions and learning? And that's where technology can come in. But remember, they do have the biggest impact and influence on what you're trying to do in HR, which is create fantastic employee experiences or improve engagement. And leaders are your big key to get there. So that's the third trend. The fourth trend I want to talk about is when you have agility, when you have technology, you can collect more data and you need to make use of insights, not data. A lot of companies are leaning into this trend more and more than I'm seeing. And gone are the days of this. We've all been there. We've all had this. And how many of you actually, had an Excel wizard that helped you figure it out? Like, we've all had one, right? Typically it was in another department, but we'd get all this data, we'd send it to the Excel wizard, and we're like, please help me make sense of this. But yeah, that mug is pretty awesome. I got to find that. But this approach is being replaced with real-time dashboards and insights. It's quicker, there's less human error, it's more confidential. But the reality is that I want to just share an example of what I see when it comes to using data versus insights. So I'm not sure of everyone's journey here, right? Maybe you're just getting started or super sophisticated when it comes to data and employee listening. But again, I get the pleasure of working with hundreds of companies, big, small, globally. And surprisingly, this is still what companies are doing when I meet them. They get their data from an engagement survey and they say, all right, let's focus on the bottom scores and we're going to focus on those. And by focus, I mean, let's create action plans around them. Let's change the quarterly objectives. But they're missing out on using insights in more powerful ways, right? Insights versus data. Just examples, there's much more that can be done with correlative analysis or regression modeling to show which of the actual factors or things you're measuring have the biggest impact on engagement. It may not be your bottom scores, for example. Your company can't solve all the world's problems in one quarter, so our job's to understand what has the biggest influence or be predictive of where we spend our most efforts. And I think that's just a simple way of using simple data sets and modeling to try to identify where we should spend our effort and our time. One other point I want to make about data is avoiding insights in isolation. You might be asking why Beethoven. I'm not trying to just shove in music references. He actually first discussed concept of isolation back in the early 1800s, right? He was deaf and challenged personally, but obviously created some of the best music work out there. But the thing companies are prioritizing today is how do you make sure that this employee listening data, it doesn't sit in a vacuum, right? It's correlated with other things that are happening in the organization. Really good example. I work with a lot of organizations doing DE&I surveys, not only to understand representation, but more importantly, sentiment around diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. When companies go down this road, they look at data like this and they say, the sentiment of their DEI index or their measurement index is higher or lower based on different groups. But not leaving it in isolation and just simply layering it with something that executives can understand, like engagement or ENPS, you can see just a huge impact on looking at the data in another way. Let's look at those groups by an engagement level and look at the differences between two major groups in the organization. So again, just simple ways that you can layer on data and not leave it in isolation, and just wanted to share a few examples. One last piece of advice. I learned this, 15 years ago when someone said, Rob, make sure you know the art of data. I was like, okay, what does that mean? And the art was an acronym for absolute, relative, and trend. Absolute, that data is in isolation, right? Great, your engagement score is 63%. Awesome. What does that mean? What's it relative to? Other organizations, other departments in your company? And trending, right? Is it moving up? Is it moving down? So I literally on my desk have art written there. So I'm always thinking about the art of data. And I know what you're thinking, Rob, this screen, it's not music, it's art. But this is actually a picture where someone goes out and pulls single notes from famous musical scores. This is actually Mozart. And each instrument is represented by a different color. It's just a cool way to show the art of data. So, and a way to infuse music into it. So that was the fourth trend. Fifth trend is, and the last trend is, a lot of organizations are looking at methods to hear the employee voice and new ways to do that, right? Beyond surveys, right? How do they turn their employee voice initiatives up to 11? Hopefully you caught that little joke there. But the reality is I like taking complex ideas and putting it into one screen. So I want to share this really high level, and you can use the slides later, but I just wanted to add context to what I'm going to share because that's a lot to digest. But there's three ways I look at employee voice when it comes to data sources that we collect to help understand employee sentiment, build better experiences. One is solicited and unsolicited types of employee voice. Solicited, we're asking, or unsolicited, we're capturing it or collecting it without effectively asking people. The second at the bottom is structured and unstructured. You can collect really structured data that you can format, you can search in databases, or you can have unstructured data. There's no format, really difficult to process and collect. And at the top, where these concepts I'm going to share are in the maturity stage of most organizations, not all, right? Are they traditional, developing, or emerging? My goal is just to give you a quick insight in terms of what a full, complete employee voice strategy could look and feel like, or the data that you can collect to help make better people decisions. So at a very high level, when you think about traditional ways, solicited feedback like census surveys and engagement surveys, focus groups, like digging in and having a conversation is more unstructured. But on the unsolicited side, a lot of companies will do location tracking, right? Maybe it's the routes of drivers or data if people are logging in from home or not. And again, it's not traditional employee listening. You're getting feedback about their experiences to possibly correlate into something else. Computer use monitoring, right? Maybe you want to understand people's operational efficiency. What applications are they using on their computer to hit their work goals, for example? Right? Then there's examples like developing, right? Pulse surveys, like we talked about, performance check-ins, right? These are more structured, solicited conversations, but also things that are unsolicited, like recognition data. In my opinion, employee voice is understanding who's recognizing other people for living the right values and behaviors, right? I get data on that information. Maybe people that are recognizing others are actually leading indicators of future leaders in my organization, right? Things like calendar connectivity, who connects with people if I'm creating a cross-functional team, or call recordings or web chats, discussions with customers in a more unstructured way. And then from an emerging perspective, some of the things we talked about, more active listening, I call development check-ins. It's not a performance appraisal. It's development conversations to try to understand how to improve employees' experiences. Chatbots is a really interesting solicited way to get feedback through folks, but it's unstructured from a data perspective. And then things like wearables, you can detect early signs of stress. You can scrape Slack messages to see sentiment, or even social, like what are people saying on Glassdoor. Now, again, I went through this pretty quickly because it's pretty deep, but I did find it was important to think about employee listening a lot more holistically. And my goal was just to give that quick visual here to have at your disposal to understand what's possible. They all have their pros, they all have their cons, and probably do an hour session just on this. But I saw a Spinal Tap reference. Sorry, I got distracted. But hopefully it gives you a good look at a holistic employee voice strategy. So, last, just as a recap, those are the 5 major, trends that we're seeing. Be more agile, leverage and accept new technologies, leverage your secret weapons for your managers, think about insights instead of data, and then think about this a little more holistically. But what I wanted to end with the last couple of minutes was I wanted to leave everyone with a couple of mindsets to start with. It's great. I get to work with companies and reflect a year, 2, 3 years later and say, what changed in your mindset in terms of what worked and what didn't work? Or what was a really good mindset to have when you change your employee voice strategy? So there's a couple I wanted to share that I've heard a lot of companies reflect on that help them succeed. So I'll share those really briefly. First one, it's using consumer principles, right? What I mean by that is that, guess what? Your employees, they were humans before they were employees. They were consumers before they were employees. They have a certain expectation of what happens in the consumer world and how they interact in your company. And the idea here is that what can you learn from your customer relationship approaches or systems in your company to translate that into your talent world? So from a customer experience, yeah, we want to engage them. We want to personalize marketing to them. We want to listen to them. We want to understand their sentiment analysis, loyalty program, service support our customers so they never leave. Well, how do we take that same idea and concept and translate that to our talent, right? Again, talk to your marketing team. What are they doing? Also, if you're fighting for budgets going into 2024, most companies spend about 12x on their customer systems and their talent systems. A really good debate to have with your finance team when you're trying to get budget. Second mindset, remember there's types of employee voice. What I mean by that is there's 2 types. Most companies do this. Are you satisfied? Are you dissatisfied? Right? Are they happy with their experience? Are they discontent? This gets back to this concept of active listening and diagnostic feedback. But the magic, again, it's not about satisfaction and dissatisfaction. It's complemented with what I call participative management. What feedback do you have to make this a better process? What would you do differently if you were CEO for a day? When you actually build them into the discussion of not how they feel, but what they would do, that's a different mindset to have in how you approach these. And this just isn't surveys. This might be retrospectives or bringing your team together for these types of conversations. Third mindset, your process must be inclusive. If you really want to hear the voice of employees, you have to hear the voice of all employees or give them the opportunity to provide that feedback. And I love this image with all. How do you make sure it's accessible, right? Maybe people aren't on technology. Make sure that there's an ability to provide feedback there, or provide their voice. Language, not just the language from French in Canada or French and English in Canada, but maybe it's the reading levels of your organization. Like being really thoughtful, like people understand what you're asking them. And the last one is limitations. I work with a lot of healthcare or municipalities, for example. They have people that don't work in a 3-week period where you might be throwing out a survey or having a conversation. It's not very inclusive to not include those folks as well. So that's an important mindset also. The last, and I think really important mindset is we've always been told in HR, you need more data to make decisions. You're right, we do. And one time a year, connecting with your employees from an engagement survey is not going to give you that data that you need to make better people decisions. And I'll always I like leaning on the example of everyone. If you haven't seen Google's rework studies and research, check it out online. It's all free. They're very popularized in public. But when you actually get to the root of Project Oxygen and Project Aristotle, that's what the 2 projects were called. They looked at things like performance ratings, employee surveys and feedback, and great manager nominations, which is effectively feedback, right? Who is living values? Who are the managers I'd want to work with? It's listening to the employee feedback and voice. Project Aristotle, same thing. So just a recap, use consumer principles. Remember the types of employee voice. Your process must be inclusive, and HR needs data to make decisions. Now, one last thing. I saw this and I had to put in the slides. I don't really know what it represents. Maybe it's like the encore, the last thing I'm going to do. Maybe it's the grumpy cat getting happy again. I'm not sure. But I just love this. But I wanted to leave everyone with one last really important, I'll call it a mindset, I'll call it a trend. But I think what's most critical is this concept that, guess what? When you think about your organization, this is called the service profit chain. When you think about employees doing certain activities or behaviors to drive customer satisfaction, right? Customer sat is great. They renew, they come back, they refer friends. If that happens, then it turns into shareholder value. Maybe it's profitability. Maybe you're a charity that's raising donations, whatever it is. But the idea is that this is the narrative in which a successful company works. The reality is, though, customers and shareholders, those are outputs. You can't change those today. What you can change are the employee behaviors. That's why it's so critical right? There's so much evidence about how employee engagement drives customer sat, drives shareholder value. If we don't listen to them to build the experience where they can flourish, that's the biggest mindset we need to have, right? We have to get there by listening to employees as well. So that being said, I mentioned I'm just the opening act. I'm so ready to welcome to the stage kind of the main event and the main guest today, and the wonderful folks from Rexall. So quick introductions. Tunde, over 15 years in the HR sector. He joined Rexall in 2016, and he's a member of Rexall's senior leadership team. He works closely with them on org effectiveness, employee engagement, succession planning, recruitment, the whole 9 yards. Tunde, is there anything you don't do? Very happy to have him as kind of sharing his journey, in employee listening. And also, I have here as well as Jason. Jason has spent 16 years in the field of HR, primarily on talent identification and development, company culture, and employee engagement. Now he's the director of talent culture at Rexall. Him and his team actually leverage people data and the employee experience to try to deliver insightful analytics to help the organization improve the employee lifecycle, culture, and engagement. So I want to leave it to you both to take it away, but I have to ask, it's great doing an intro and a bio, but maybe with the music topic, what's the first concert you've ever attended? Maybe that's all I want to know before handing it off.
I can go first. So, concert that I attended, I enjoyed the most was a U2 concert. At this point, I didn't know who U2 was, so a friend of mine just called me up, drove me up to Hamilton, and I attended a U2 concert and been a big fan since then.
It's my first concert I ever went to. Amazing, Tunde. Jay.
That's awesome. I don't know if anybody's going to remember this one. Maybe a few of you on the call. But my first concert was live in Fun Loving Criminals. And that was way back, I think, in like grade 8.
Amazing. Well, thanks for playing along. I guess the virtual floor is yours.
Sounds good. Thanks, Rob. And tons of great insights that you provided. I certainly took away some nuggets as well. Art is something that is a new concept to me, which I definitely will take back and will leverage as well. So as Rob mentioned, my name is Tunde Kolarinwa. I'm VP of Talent Management at Rexall. Here today, I have my colleague, Jason Garant, who's the Director of Talent and Culture on my team. Knowing that we have a global audience, I want to quickly introduce Rexall. So Rexall is a retail pharmacy in Canada. For those of you in the States, it's similar to a Walgreens or CVS. For those of you in Europe, perhaps, England I'm more familiar with, it's more like a Boots. We're about approximately 400 stores strong and about 8,000 employees, and we're a proud member of the McKesson global family. Jay, do you want to quickly do an intro?
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks very much, Rob. The opening was awesome and the content's been great. I've been with Rexall for about 3 years, and for me, moving over to Rexall, I was looking to get into an industry of wellness. And it's funny when you think retail and wellness going together, but Rexall really does create that culture of wellness for our internal customers who are our employees, and then also for our external customers who shop in our stores and our patients that go to the pharmacies. So love it and really happy to be here to talk through some of the things we're doing.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jay. So today we're going to talk about how Rexall empowered our leaders through leveraging WorkTango. At Rexall, we have what we call our continuous understanding strategy, which is, in our view, an evolution of the continuous listening strategy. So it takes that concept of active listening and takes it to another level. Our goal here is to ensure that our employee voices are heard and beyond being heard, understood as well. One of the practices that we have is we don't survey unless we're going to do something about it. That is what I counsel our leaders on, to say, if you're going to ask the question, you have to do something with the results of the question as well. We also have it embedded in our values of being open and candid, and also debating, deciding, and committing as well. So that's made it an easy transition, or easier for us to land this initiative. As we look through our continuous understanding strategy, as Rob alluded to, we measure multiple journeys within the organization. We have 2 pulse surveys that we conduct, one in March and one in June. We have our employee opinion survey that we conduct in September, which leads to our EOS action planning. And the EOS action planning is really where the rubber hits the road, in that it is a very collaborative approach to solutioning. You listen to your employees, you understand what their pain points are, and then together as a group, using somewhat of a design thinking approach, you come up with solutions to address any issues that have been uncovered. We take it down to the granular level. We have, like I said, about 400 stores. Each store has their own action plan, which leads up to the district having an action plan, which leads up to the division having an action plan, and so on and so forth. So every layer within the organization comes up with their own action plan that is specific to them, which caters to their needs. That being said, we still have an organization action plan, which is, of course, based off of the information that we've been able to pull. In addition to that, we have our 30, 60, 90-day onboarding surveys that we conduct using the WorkTango platform, as well as our exit surveys. And also we have ad hoc surveys that we leverage as well. Now, this comes into play anytime we launch new initiatives to really understand how is it landing, what is the team saying, what is the sentiment, what can we change quickly to address whatever pain points the team has. In addition to that, if there are particular groups or particular sentiments or factors that we realize either during the pulse survey or the engagement survey, we use these ad hoc surveys to do a deeper dive to really understand what the true sentiment is and what the team is really and truly saying. The combination of all of these is what we look at from our insights perspective. We titled that our employee journey. And we leverage all of these data points to come up with good insights that we can pass on to the senior leadership team. So this is a quick overview of what those look like. So again, employee opinion survey, a larger annual survey. Our surveys are unique in that they're not loaded with 70, 50 questions. I think we tap out at about 15 questions. So quick, straight to the point, direct hits. That really address the pain points of the organization. There are only 4 questions that are static, which is the engagement questions, which allows us to trend. All the others we continue to change based on what we've heard from the team. So it's not the same thing that is being asked all the time, unless it is work that we need to continue to do. Same thing as the pulse survey. It's done semi-annually, and we actually use that to pinpoint and track particular topics. So, for example, I think we're in the midst of releasing one shortly, and we're looking at wellness, for example. We also know that we're in this day and age where turnover is quite high within the world. Essentially, we're looking at growth and development specifically, because we know that's one of the major drivers for employee turn within the world, essentially. Then we're looking at onboarding surveys. What is the experience like? I always say to my team, when they ask me what I do, my team is responsible for finding A talent, creating the environment for A talent to flourish, which is again through learning and various other things, and then measuring to ensure that we are indeed doing what we set out to do. So we use this onboarding survey to really ensure that we're not telling lies, we're not telling people falsehoods. And if we are, we need to correct it, address it, so that when we bring people on board, they are eventually joining us for the real sentiment or the real reason why they signed up in the first place. Then we have our exit interviews. We have our exit surveys. We do the exit surveys because we need to understand why are people leaving, so we can go and address any issues that pop up. And like I mentioned, the ad hoc surveys. All of these surveys managers have access to. The employee opinion survey, they have access to at the end of the survey. Same thing with the pulse survey, but the rest of them, they have access to right away. Because as alluded to, managers are the key to the success of any employee voice strategy that is out there, because they're often the forgotten middle that we call them. You have your frontline employees, you have the folks in the middle, and you have the folks at the top. Everyone is fighting to hear a voice, but everyone is forgetting the folks in the middle, who indeed are the ones that have the most impact with the employee group. So I'm going to pass it on to Jay, and it's going to take us through the rest of the presentation.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Tunde. So at Rexall, we have a leadership model, and it's called I Lead. And you can see here we've got being open and candid. And this is one of our I Lead behaviors. It's as Rob mentioned earlier, the active listening element. It lives within our leadership competencies and our leadership model, as well as showing respect and keeping our commitments to one another and to our teams. So all leaders at Rexall have access to their survey results. Reinforcing what Tunde and Rob said, it's really our managers that are going to bring this to life. When you look at how being open and candid applies to all of the stakeholders in our business, from an employee perspective, when we send out a survey, we want to hear their voice. We let them know loud and clear. Let us hear your voice. Share your feedback with us open and candidly, and then we will share the results of the feedback with you. One of the errors I think that gets made in many organizations is they never share the results back. What came out of the survey that makes people less inclined to want to complete them when they don't know what the outcomes are, and then ensuring the teams that their feedback is going to inspire action. From the leader perspective, your employees are providing you and Rexall with open and candid feedback. They are going to get more out of these surveys and more out of their team being open and candid, whether it's positive or negative feedback, than they would likely get any other way. And then reviewing the results, digesting the results, and it's up to the team, the leader to share those results, summarize the results, and cascade the results to their team. The leaders are also empowered to lead the action planning process, as Tunde mentioned, and it's very collaborative. Their team is included. There are no secrets. So for Rexall, yes, 100%, all leaders have access to the results and the employees' input. Some people may ask us why we give leaders results to the access to their team's results. When you look at who has access to the overall results, certainly it's the executive team, certainly it's HR, but we don't believe that HR and the executive team should own the results, digging deep, asking questions, leading actions. That belongs with every leader in the business. So it creates a culture of trust between Rexall, between its leaders, and between the leaders and their employees. It also creates buy-in in our culture and the strategy. Leaders have true visibility to the engagement and feedback of their team. We feel it should never be a secret. Limiting a leader's visibility totally devalues our mission to be open and candid, and our promise that we're all listening to understand our employees better. And nobody should know their team better than a team's leader. So direct access to results gives leaders perspective into the culture of their team. Leaders can deep dive into their own results, discover their own insights and trends, ones we might not otherwise see at an organizational level. Leaders craft the debrief unique to their team's results, so they own that communication, they own cascading those results. And leaders can also determine collaboratively with their team where to act, what to impact, to create positive change where necessary altogether. We wanted to share over a quick case study. And this really was the best example that we had of giving leaders access to their results and what can come from it. So leaders with access to their results across the business, we had a group of operations leaders that have a role rolling up to them, which is a district support pharmacist. For anybody who doesn't know what that role is, essentially if a pharmacist or a pharmacy manager is sick, can't come into work for some reason, we have mobile pharmacists that go and will fill in those spaces or those vacancies while a pharmacy manager or a pharmacist is off. So the operations team identified that there was very, very low engagement within this group. And although we had seen it, we look at that very high level. It was great to see the operations team also reinforce that. When we dug deeper into the comments and when the leaders dug deeper into the comments, we were reading that they were feeling overworked, that they were feeling over-traveled, going location to location. They weren't feeling like they were being communicated to or included, and they were feeling underappreciated and not heard at all. This highlighted some real risks and some real realities for us. One of them being high turnover. Pharmacists are very difficult to find. It's a very specific education and a very specific role to be filled, and seeing that high turnover is something that we can't afford. Disengagement, quality of work, there are a number of risks. So what did we do? So the actions we took. So this fueled further actions. And this is what we talk about when you get down to the conversation. So we hosted volunteer feedback sessions between human resources and the executive level operations leads to better understand what the DSPs were feeling and to hear them out in person. As well, we created an ad hoc survey through WorkTango specifically targeted at the DSPs so that we could dig deeper to understand as well and solicit some more granular feedback there. And the outcomes were huge. The actions are felt. We went through reviewed employee contracts to make sure that that we were living up to our obligations. We reviewed working hours for full-time and part-time employees to make sure that we weren't overstretching. Reviewing geographic ranges to make adjustments so that people would have fewer locations to go to. And then a number of other things. And the most important thing is the DSPs are feeling heard and they're feeling understood. Okay, and I'll pass it back over to Tunde.
Thanks, Jay. I was hoping I would make it through this presentation without having to say I'm on mute. And I almost goofed there. So okay. So whereas our continuous understanding strategy taking us, essentially from an employee comments perspective, we average around about 4,500 comments. In our last survey, we got about 4,800 comments, which some folks say is good and bad. We take the mix. It doesn't matter. As long as they're speaking, we're here to listen and understand exactly what it is that they're saying. Overall, from a participation perspective, we're averaging about 71% participation. We know this is high, but it's good because it means that our employees are really involved in not just working for the organization, and not just working for the organization, but also working on the organization, which is something I usually say that Tracy just reminded me as well. So we're pretty proud of that. In addition to that, on average, our engagement score has gone up about 34 percentage points since 2016. We attribute this to the fact that, again, we are listening, we're understanding, we are acting on what the team is saying. We're being very open and candid in our conversations. We're giving teams the opportunity to debate, decide, and commit, and also decide what exactly the solution is that they want. Like I said, we take the design thinking approach to our solutioning within the organization, which really helps us and which really ensures that we are collaborative in our approach. From our ENPS perspective, we are a plus 41 since we started tracking this in 2019. This is our semi-annual pulse survey, which essentially asks the question, how likely are you to recommend this organization to other folks? And we're pretty proud of that as well. We've continued to see a positive trend as we've gone through even some problem groups, again, through listening and understanding what their pain points are. In addition to that, we've had about 485 unique action plans submitted to date. And these are the unique plans that each group commits to fulfilling and meeting in order to address any pain points that their teams have. I'm also very, very proud of that as well, because it does show that folks are indeed listening and folks are indeed taking action based on the feedback that they've received. Cool. That's the end of our presentation. I'm going to pass it off to Jared, I believe.
All right. Thank you very much. We're now going to get into some Q&A. All right. Up first, we have a question from Chandra. How about employees' participation in organization strategic initiatives? How do employees participate in these strategic initiatives? What can they do? What does that look like?
Happy to share my experiences, but I'll ask Rexall if they want to share first.
So in terms of the organization's strategic initiatives, usually what we typically do is there's essentially a cascade down where you have the overall organization's objectives. Then each layer is allowed to decide how their goals and objectives layer into these strategic goals and objectives. In terms of determining the overarching, it's usually a top down, right? It comes down from McKesson down to Rexall, and then teams are allowed to say, you know what, here's the blocks that you have. how are you going to participate in said box? Rob earlier had mentioned, development check-ins and not waiting to the annual survey. That's the approach we take. We have a quarterly performance review, and within that, you have your goals and objectives that you've actually created that ladder up within the organization.
Yeah. The other thing I'll add is sometimes it's, in terms of employee participation, it's showing what we call imperatives, or I think some other companies call initiatives as well, is here's where we're going from a direction perspective. What's missing, right? What, are there any gaps in our approach? And you think it's really critical to the organization. If you were CEO for a day, what decision would you make? So there's just opportunities for people to participate in that participative management in terms of the direction of the company, which obviously goes well. And then I like what you said, Tanya, working on or with the business versus working for the business.
All right, thank you very much. Got a related question here from Sarah. What are the best ways to solicit employee feedback that garners the most results? Squeaky wheels make the most noise, but we want to hear from a wider group of associates.
I mean, just what I'll share quickly is what I find works really well is that curated idea I was mentioning earlier, right? I tell this story all the time because I love it, but Good to Great, Jim Collins has this something called brutal facts. And brutal facts, the way it works is I'll ask my team organization, what did not go well this quarter, right? And you get a list and you get a bunch of themes, but then it doesn't become loudest person in the room or squeaky wheel. We say, hey, organization or team, if you were to prioritize the 2 or 3 most important things that matter to this business, what would those be and why? And now you start curating a list of the top things that the organization is going to figure out versus saying one person screaming that number 18 is the loudest and most important thing. So I find that's a really good way to solicit feedback and a bit of curation and prioritization before actually getting into actioning.
Yeah, I agree with that, Rob. And I think it's also creating trust. And, not just saying it, but consistently saying it and consistently showing it. And, we really do have a great culture at Rexall with being open and candid. People feel like they can make mistakes. People feel like they can speak to their leaders and speak to one another about what those opportunities are or what would make the business better. They aren't telling us because they don't want us to do anything with the information they're giving us. They're genuinely trying to make our organization better in most cases. So I think encouraging that trust, having it as a part of the conversation all the time, reinforcing it, being open and candid is okay in our organization. We want to hear from you is really another way to really drive home getting the most open and candid answers or comments from your participants.
Just one thing to add to that is just do it, essentially, right? Because I think what's happening here is probably we try to overthink it and be like, man, will we hear from them or we're not hearing from them, and so on. Just get started, and even if you hear from 2 people, 3 people, take action, right? Because as soon as you take action, then other people will see that you are indeed listening, understanding what they're saying, and taking action. So as soon as you start that, then you start to gather more or get more feedback, even some unsolicited feedback. So it's important to prove and show to the company or the employees that you are indeed going to do something when you hear from them.
All right. Fantastic. And relating to that, both Joe Smith here and Guillermo had a question, and I kind of had a question related to this. Are these internal surveys typically anonymous? I know some people won't give the most candid feedback if their name is directly right above it.
Mm-hmm. Sunday, I can answer that one if you don't mind. So our engagement surveys and our pulse surveys are anonymous. Of course, WorkTango gives us the capability to get as close as we can. For example, to be able to view something by role or by district, division, location, whatever that might be. But our exit surveys are not. And we let them know, your leader will see this feedback and your leader's leader will see this feedback. Our onboarding surveys as well, open and candid, your leader will receive this feedback, and so will your leader's leader. So that also feeds into being open and candid and creating that trust that we're going to not only listen, but we're going to do something with the information you're providing with us. And it could be even an immediate response.
Yeah. The color I'll add, just seeing so many companies go through this is predominantly companies have majority of stuff confidential. There are nuances between anonymous and confidential, and I won't get deep into that too much today. But there are certain times when, you know, the non-confidential feedback is important, whether it's onboarding or exit. But the key is making sure it's really clear to employees what's happening and who has access to it. You know, a lot of people say, wow, like people can just use SurveyMonkey. Like, why does WorkTango exist? And the reality is we call it our employee promise. There's no way someone can go and individualize a response. And that's when you start getting authentic feedback. So I think there's room for both in different parts of the employee experience. And companies do approach it differently. But you know, thanks, Rexall, for sharing kind of how you approach it as well.
All righty. And I think with that, that's going to be time for today. Rob, Tunde, Jason, thank you all so much for being here. Thank you, WorkTango, for sponsoring today's webinar. And last but not least, thanks to all of you in the audience for your time and attention today. Today's webinar was recorded, and you'll be receiving a link to that recording and a follow-up email, so keep an eye on your inbox for that. In the meantime, thank you so much to WorkTango again, and we will see you on the next one.
Awesome.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.